Hey students, welcome to week 2 of English and week 4 of this quarter. We're going to jump right into this class. If you read the syllabus last week like you were supposed to, you know that this class is about Indigenous history and the art of storytelling. So this first quarter is really going to be focused on learning about Indigenous culture, especially here in the Bay Area, and then next quarter will be more on the art of storytelling. Today, we're going to get an intro into Indigenous cultures. What does it mean to be Indigenous? So you will need, even though you're watching the video, I need you to take notes. Either in the note taker document in Google Classroom, it's titled number 2A, or if you want to just send me pictures of paper that you write notes on, or a screenshot of your phone notes. I just want you to be taking some sort of notes today that you will submit. So if you need to get ready for this, pause the video and get what you need to take notes. Okay, so when we're learning about Indigenous cultures, there's a couple things that we need to acknowledge before we move into the topic. One, Ms. Z is a white woman, right? The people you should be learning about this stuff from is the Indigenous people. Unfortunately, colonialism and white supremacy has disallowed them from being in these positions, like being a teacher, who can teach people these things. I, on top of that, acknowledge that, and I'm taking the information I teach you directly from Indigenous people. I'll never use information that I found from some sort of white history book, white source. All of this stuff comes from Indigenous creators and writers. The next thing we need to acknowledge is that we are on stolen land. This is supposed to say land and not lane. We must acknowledge the land we are on traditionally belongs to the Ohlone people. We will learn about what that means a little later in this lecture. But those are the people that this land belongs to. The tribes mentioned, so in the land treaties there where they see, it's called ceding land, it's session number 281 is this area of Oakland, and these are the tribes that were mentioned in the treaty: the Chapasim, Kotoplaneni, Laonahumne, Sejewomne, Suka'a, and Wichilila tribes were the ones that this land was taken from, otherwise known as Chochenyo Ohlone Nation or people. Makin mak moekma walwulum akoy mak warep man mak hiswi is moekma for we are moekma Ohlone, welcome to our land where we are born. So this is a statement from Moekma people welcoming us to their land where they were born. And we're going to go more into what that exactly means in a bit. So let's talk more about what a land acknowledgement is. A land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes the history and legacy of colonialism. You may or may not have heard this before. Colonialism is the historical act of white people, whiteness, washing away all other cultures, right? So colonialism was European immigrants coming and taking over this entire land. Those were colonialists. Colonialism is also the force of a certain religion on people, a certain way of dressing. It's just erasing people's culture. So we're acknowledging that this impacted Indigenous peoples, their territories, and their practices. It's a simple, powerful way of showing respect and a step towards correcting the stories and practices that erase Indigenous peoples' history and culture by inviting in and honoring the truth, right? So we're saying what we've been taught our whole lives is not right. And we're going to acknowledge that and instead start to learn about these histories and these people. All right, so what does it mean to be Indigenous? You may have heard this word before, you may have not. Indigenous people exist all over the world. In this class, we're specifically talking about the Indigenous people of the United States and California. The word Indigenous refers to the notion of a place-based human ethnic culture. So that means that your ethnicity is directly tied to the land. It's not a culture that's migrated from its homeland and is not a settler or colonial population. So that means that if you came to the United States from a different country, or your ancestors came here from a different country, then you are not Indigenous of America. But you might be Indigenous of a different country or land, right? And we'll get more into what that means for each of us later. To be Indigenous is by definition different from being of a world culture such as the Western or Euro-American culture. So it's different than being like me, I'm German. My people are from Germany and they were born in Germany, but that does not equal Indigenous people. Okay. We're going to watch this video on what it means to be an Indigenous person to Native Americans in this country. And while you're watching this, I want you to think about your connection to your own culture and what maybe you connect with some things these people say. What does it mean to you to be Guatemalan, Venezuelan, Mexican, Black? What does that mean to you? And try to connect with this video.
Wait, hello?
Wait, Geogic and Dejikas, hello, my name is Geogic.
Trina Mumilak Kakawanga, Inuyunga, Kamanito Milaksunga. I'm Indigenous. I am Indigenous. I'm Inuk. I'm a person. I'm a human being.
To me, what it means to be Indigenous.
To be Indigenous means I come from the land.
To have a connection to this place, to have a connection to this land, to have a connection to one another. While Canada is celebrating its 150th birthday, we've been here a lot longer than that.
To me, this means 150 years of attempted genocide, colonization, and cultural appropriation. But it also means 150 years of survival, resilience, and revitalization for my people. For the next 7 generations, our people will rise and will rebuild our culture that was once taken away from us.
Being Indigenous means having a responsibility to one another, to our communities, to represent our communities well, and to always have each other's backs.
As an actress and storyteller, I will push for the proper representation of our people in mainstream media. Maybe over the next 150 years, we can look at the basic human rights and equality for all Canadians.
Chimigwech. I hope you enjoyed this. Peace.
Thank you. Matna nakongming kwana. Wait, hello?
Wait, Gia.
Okay, so now we're gonna stop, and I want you to write, what did you think of this video, and did you make any connections that you feel with your own culture, that these Indigenous people feel with their culture? Okay, so who are the Indigenous people, or where are they? There are 562 federally recognized tribes in the US, and many more are still fighting for recognition. So this means that our white government came, stole these people's land, murdered millions and millions of Native people, and then told them that your ethnicity, your tribe, your culture doesn't exist. It isn't real. And so these cultures had to fight to be recognized as an Indigenous tribe by our government. And we'll learn about it later, the Ohlone people were not recognized until really recently, actually, even though they've been in this land for over 10,000 years, right? So think about, does that even make sense? No. Also, Aboriginal, Native, First Peoples are also terms for these group of people. We're going to usually just use Indigenous and Native Americans in this class, but know that if you come from an Aboriginal group, a Native group, a group that's referred to as First Peoples, you're also an Indigenous person. It is estimated that 370 million Indigenous people, where did that go away? Indigenous people live in over 70 countries worldwide. So that would equal to fewer than 6% of the total world population. So there's almost 8 billion people in the world. A billion is a million millions, right? So less than 6% of the entire world population is Indigenous. If we think about the definition of Indigenous, right, First Peoples, the first people that inhabited all of the land, my mind would think there should be more of them, right? So this statistic shows us that not just in America, but all over the world, there is an active genocide or killing or erasure of Indigenous people and their cultures. Okay, so now I want us to think about, do you belong to an Indigenous group? So I want you to think about what the definition of Indigenous means, and do you or your ancestors fall into this group? Respond in chat, which means you're going to respond on this next slide or question. Okay, so if you weren't sure if you were one or not, I will break it down, right? So we have Native Americans, right? If your people were born in this country thousands of years ago, they never left, you're Indigenous to America. Let's go south, right? We have Mexico. Indigenous groups there are the Aztecs and the Mayans, right? These huge empires. Those are the original people of Mexico and Central America. So if you come from those cultures, then you're Indigenous. But we also, in these countries, have a mix of white people, right? People from Spain are white, and they came and colonized Mexico, South America, Central America. So you may be descendants of just people who are Spaniards or from Spain, which would mean you are not an Indigenous person. But you may have a mix of both, right? You might come from Aztec or Mayan people, and people from Spain, which would mean you have a percentage of Indigenous blood in you. If you're from Guatemala, you have grandparents who speak Hmong. You're probably Indigenous from Guatemala. And all the other countries, right? If your people were directly born in that country, they didn't migrate from Salvador, they didn't migrate from somewhere else, then you're Indigenous. If you are Black, then your lineage is probably indigenous to Western Africa, right? Because of the slave trade. So Western African countries were the ones that were brought over here. So you were indigenous of like the Ivory Coast, let's say. Then we have people in the Middle East, right? Let's talk about, let's see if you're like Palestinian or you're from Yemen. Are your people directly from that country, or did they migrate from somewhere else? So then that would be you're indigenous to Yemen, you're indigenous to Palestine, all those things. So now, again, think about, are you indigenous or are you not? I'm not indigenous, right? I come from a Eurocentric country. Spain is a Eurocentric country. Germany, that's where most of my family comes from, is Eurocentric, means it's in Europe. We're not counted as indigenous people because of migration. Okay. So in the Bay Area, there's many different tribes, but we refer to this group as one nation of Ohlone. Have you ever heard of Ohlone? So Ohlone is the classification of the language spoken by the people in this area. So this term Ohlone was given to this entire group by Spanish people, right? So by the white people, they came and they said, you're all Ohlone, even though they were not. There are many groups of Native people in the Bay. They've come to call themselves Muwekma Ohlone. So this means, so they were called Ohlone by the white government, and they said, that's not our name that we've given ourselves. We'll use it to honor our language, but we call ourselves Muwekma. Okay, so Muwekma Ohlone is the name for the Bay Area indigenous people. But if we look at where we live in this brown area, it's Chochenyo. So the people that, the land we are on is not just Ohlone, that's their language. It's not just Muwekma, that's this entire area. They're Chochenyo. So we can call them Chochenyo Ohlone, Chochenyo Muwekma Ohlone, but that is the group of people who were here before us. All right, so we're going to dig into the Ohlone people, their history. We would normally spend way more time learning about this stuff, but since school is weird now, we're going to just like learn about just the tip of the iceberg for the Ohlone people, right? We could really, in reality, spend an entire year learning about this culture, but we just don't have the time. So I'm giving you a gross, really short version. So the collective Ohlone people, remember, that's not their ethnicity or the ethnic tribe they come from, but the group that speak this type of language. Were also originally referred to by the Spaniards as Costanoans. So they were first called Costanoan people because they were on the coast, and then they became known as Ohlone. They were about 50 separate tribes with different languages, but were put collectively under the Greater Ohlone label when they were colonized, right? So that's what we were just talking about. There are 50 different names, but the ignorant and violent white people wanted to just kind of lump them all together and say, you're all the same. That's like me saying that like every Central American country is the same. You're all just like Central American people, right? That's ignorant, and it erases people's identities. This family of tribes lived in the Bay Area for over 10,000 years, and they never viewed themselves as one distinct group, right? So they saw themselves as 50 separate tribes, but then they've over time become lumped together into just one, which is incorrect. All right, so Muwekma Ohlone people. These groups freely interacted with one another. They moved around annually, which means every year. So they would make 2 moves to temporary housing and then back to their permanent village sites in a seasonal round of hunting, fishing, and gathering. So depending on when the fishing was good, weather and all this stuff, they would probably go closer to the coast, do their hunting, gathering their food, and then in the colder months, they probably came more inland for warmer weather in their grass-like huts. They also use the practice of periodic burning of the landscape to promote the growth of native grasses. What's really interesting about this is that, so these people lived here for 10,000 years, so they know the land, right? They are part of this landscape. But then white people came, colonized it, and we stopped allowing them to do their controlled and periodic burning, which is helpful for the environment. Now, since they are not doing controlled burning, this is why we have such huge wildfires all around California, because there's too much dry grass, dry land that just sits there ready to all burn at once, right? So now our government's kind of realizing we messed up. We didn't allow this traditional practice that's been happening for thousands and thousands of years to continue, and now it's kind of messing up everyone's lives. So now they're thinking about allowing controlled burning by Indigenous people to happen again. I don't know if they'll actually do that, but it's important for the land. Some of the closest neighboring tribes were the Coast Miwok people, who inhabited both Marin and Sonoma country to the north. So to the north was Miwok people, and we are Muwekma down here. All right, here's their everyday life. Just some little facts. So each tribe had about 50 to 500 members, and the groups often had intertribal marriage to strengthen tribal bonds. So remember, these people have done this for thousands of years, and they've never had contact with outside countries, but this is a practice that happened all over the world, right? Even in white Europe countries, we know about the princess is betrothed to marry the prince of this nation, right? In order to stop war, because white people is violent, versus here, they would use marriage to strengthen the bond. The average Ohlone Indian survived off of a diet that was mostly crushed acorns, nuts, grass, seed, berries, and trapped fish or game. Game is animals like deer or elk. So mostly vegetarian, and then they would eat fish or meat when they could and when they had it. They built dome-shaped houses of woven or bundled mats of tulle. So there's a lot of native grasses in this area. So they use that grass to make their homes, and they also use it to make their boats, right? There's a lot of water around here, and they made boats out of grass, and that's what they use to get around the bay. All right, missions. So we've all heard of Mission Dolores, these places called the Mission in the Bay Area. But I didn't learn any of this until I moved here, what the missions exactly were. So in the year 1769, the Spanish people came over here, the Spanish Catholics came over here and started putting up what they called missions, but they were basically like military forts. And they said, here is this religion, this is the right way, become a Catholic, become a Christian, and deny your culture and your beliefs. So there's records are scarce of the conversion, but we know that some Ohlone people willingly converted or became Christian, but most of them were forced to convert. So that means they did not want to give up their traditions but they were forced to through violence or other tactics that were pretty still violent. They created a powerful mission. The Spanish created a powerful mission system based around the San Francisco, Mission Dolores, and then they would use the native Ohlone people as manual labor. That's a nice way to say slaves, right? So they trick them and they're like, oh, become a Christian, we'll take care of you, got you, you're a slave now. The missions were extremely strict, and once a native was baptized, they were then the property of the church and couldn't leave the mission without permission. So if we think about our understanding of Christianity today, imagine you become baptized and then the church owns you. That's not okay, right? That's not religion. That's not what, so they were using religion to enact violence against people. The missions essentially destroyed the native people's culture, turned them into slaves who then were at the mercy of the colonizers. So that's what started the almost complete erasure of the Ohlone people. This happened all over the country with different types of groups along the coast here. It was mostly Spanish missions that colonized, especially California. Okay, the tribe today. So tragically, obviously, the Ohlone people were nearly wiped out because of disease, warfare, and colonization from European immigrants, mostly Spain. In the 20th century, the 20th century is the 1900s. So in the 1900s, the tribes finally came together against the federal government and struggled for years to gain basic recognition. So like we said earlier, the government stole these people's lands, erased their culture, and basically said, you don't exist until the 1900s. Then these Native people were like, you need to recognize us as a people and honor your treaties. Okay, in the 1950s, the Ohlone Tribal Council received supposedly only $150 for 8.5 million acres of land. So the federal government said, here's $150, you just gave us all of your 8.5 million acres. Right, so that's how they took their land, and they only paid them $150. It wasn't until 96, so that's only 24 years ago, that the group was somewhat recognized in a previous unambiguous federal recognition. So that means they were specifically named in a federal recognition, which granted them some rights as an American tribe. So that's also part of why they do not want to recognize tribes, is because they do not want to owe them tribal rights that were determined in the treaties made hundreds of years ago, right? So it's all this like sneaky trickery that our government does and still does to continually erase these people. There are small segments of the Ohlone people that still live in the Bay Area. We should never forget that Indigenous people are all around us. They might be in our classes. They still very much exist, despite trying to be erased by multiple European nations. So I think that just is a testament to how strong the Indigenous culture are, right? They really are warrior people. Most of the tribes continue to preserve and revitalize their cultural history through education, restoration of their native languages, and the practice of storytelling. We'll learn more about storytelling later, but I want you to know about the languages. I think there's only about 2 people who still speak the Muwekma language, right? So if those 2 people die without recording the language or teaching it to someone else, the language is dead. It won't exist anymore, which is heartbreaking. Can you imagine your language, or let's say if you speak Spanish, if no one else in the world spoke your language? I think that hurts. Okay, so that was just a very quick, very small history of the Muwekma Ohlone people. Chichenyo is here who live in the Bay Area. I'm going to go over your assignments with you now. So we're in the classwork page. We're going to scroll to the bottom. We're Unit 2, Topic 1, Week 4. Attendance check-in. You're doing the Ed puzzle right now. Here's where you're going to submit your notes, either the document that I created, upload a picture of your notes, however you took notes, submit them here. Then we have our interactive notebook assignment. It's the same type of assignment as last week. Obviously, our content is just different. Okay, let's go. Okay, stress check, we can do that. Then you have some vocab. You have 3 vocab words this week. They are big, complex words, but you all can understand them. You are very smart. Read through these. If it's confusing, that's okay. Do your best to understand it. It's your first time with these words. All I expect you to do is try, right? We're going to go over them again next week. So this is just your first time working with these pretty complex words. Here's a more specific definition. Then you're going to tell me, what do you think it means? Again, these words are hard. Do your best. Then you're going to match some definitions between your vocab words and words I taught you in today's lecture. Reading, if the link doesn't show here, click it here or click it here, and it will take you to News ELA, whatever you want to call it. You have a reading assignment. And then a reading response, follow these directions, pretty easy. A journal again, I want you to read through my journal just so you get to know me a little better. Write your journal. Here's another link. If it's not here, if it doesn't work here, click it here. This is your flip grid. Group work reflection. I want you to draw something, and then we're responding to a quote. Now, this last assignment for the week, I wanted you guys to play this type of educational computer game, but if you are on a school Chromebook, the website is blocked, so ignore this until next week. If you are on your own computer, try to download the game and play it. Otherwise, don't worry about this assignment, okay? So you only have, if you have a Chromebook, you only have assignments 1 through 3. We're ignoring this one this week. And that is it. Any questions at all? Remember, if you get stuck, you can always text me. Where'd my little thing go? Text me, email me. Those are the fastest ways to get a hold of me. Talk to you later. I look forward to reading your guys' work. Bye.